days, though the sky is falling, they need your love in their lives. I wanna be in the light, as you are in the night. I wanna shine like the stars in the heavens. Oh Lord, be my light, and be my salvation. 'Cause all I want is to be in the light. All I want is to be in the light. Separated, I cut myself clean from a past that comes back in my darkest of dreams. Been apprehended by a spiritual force and the grace that replaced all of me. I've realized, what if I stumble? What if I fall? What if I lose my step and I'll make fools of us all? Will the love continue when my walk becomes a crawl? What if I stumble? And what if I saw a man with a tat on his big fat belly, wiggling around like marmalade jelly? It took me a while to catch what he said, 'cause I had him at the rhythm, I was running with my head. Jesus saves, it's what it rained, and it tickled the tattoo green. He stood in a box in the middle of the city, and it clearly had a drain. What's going on inside me? I despise my own behavior. This only serves to confirm my suspicions. Now I'm still a man in need of a savior. What will people think when they hear that I'm a Jesus freak? What will people do when they find that it's true? I don't really care if they label me a Jesus freak. There ain't no disguising the truth.
What's up, everybody? Goodness. We finally here, right? And I'm talking about, man, I've been trying to get on here for a while now. Man, it's just like the world. I don't know if it's the world or the devil. Yeah, man, but I'm telling you, dude, every chance I've tried to get on here for the last 2 weeks, I've been stopped, it seems like, at every turn. And, well, here we are, It's good to be here. I kind of wanted to talk about a couple things that I've stumbled upon too this last week or two. I've been studying Old Testament prophecies. And, well, that's what I'm doing tonight is, dang, I wanted to kind of, show a little bit what I've been studying in the book of Daniel and book of Revelation. I've been in the book of Revelation for about a year now. And just last probably 3 months or so, I've been actually talking about it. I feel like I know enough now to even talk about it because, you don't even want to get started talking about the book of Revelation if you don't even have a clue what it's about, And I think that's a lot of people's problem. They get on there, read a couple things, and they want to consider they know the book of Revelation. That's not true. It took me a year to even get close to where I'm at, I think a lot had to do with, a lot of the rapture talk last year. I was already kind of in it. And everybody was like, oh, the rapture's coming on the 23rd. I'm like, dang, well, probably a good time to study the book of Revelation. You remember last year supposed to be on September 23rd. They said the rapture was going to come and all that last year, remember? And, well, I'm talking about, man, that's probably what started. Actually right before that, it was crazy how that all happened because, right before all these people started talking about the rapture and stuff, it was just, what was it? Right before that, it was like everybody was talking about how the rapture wasn't true. You even had a bunch of the big content creators putting it out, and everybody, I guess, going Catholic on us, or post-trib, I guess. And, some people don't even think people are going to go with a rapture, even though obviously, it talks about people being called up in the sky, the dead being raised first, and, the other believers going along with them, right? So, I really hate to get on here this early late at night. I guess it's still early in the morning, considering the fact. But, I just want to come on here and talk about a little bit what I've found, see if anybody was interested, And I think it's very interesting. I don't know if I'm going to pull out any of these or not. See, I went from, carrying like a Bible bag, little bag. Now I got to have a whole backpack for everything I need, But anyways, and what gets me with a lot of Christians too is that they think that they're going to be saved from everything, right? So they're like, hey, what do I care about really what happens in the book of Revelation, But I'm just trying to say, you got all these people that think, obviously like the Catholics, they think at the end of time when all the, people are going to be called up, the dead will be raised and all this, the second coming is the same thing as what, the Protestants think about the pre-tribulation rapture, except, they're thinking that it comes when Jesus comes, back to earth in the end, like that's what the Catholics do and post-trib people do, post-tribulation rapture, and man, that's an ugly sight, man. You imagine going through all that stuff, man. The bold judgments, right? I tell you what, I don't want to be here for that. And, it just don't make no sense, right? And then you got these people that think that's going to happen, before everything, right? Like nobody's going to see anything, man. I'm going to be raptured up by that time. These old people. I'm telling you, dude, and I've been studying the church age theory again on the churches in the book of Revelation 2-3. And, a lot of people disagree with that. It's not a popular thought, because usually when you study that, you end up getting towards like a mid-trib. If there was a rapture, it happened mid-tribulation, not after. I believe, I don't know, man, how it all going to work. But I kind of got, some notes here. I want to kind of explain a little bit what I'm talking about here. And there's my other notes on it. So we're going to talk about a couple different verses. Yeah, y'all probably aware of most of them. And this is why I've come to this conclusion, And like I said, this has been a year into it. And see, we understand that most people think, right? So let's see, I guess probably the best place to start. Let's see. And what I'm looking into now, well, what I'm looking at the second is, this is a King James study Bible, from, and this is original King James, not like, authorized or nothing like that. I'm pretty sure it's just straight up King James version of the Bible. Well, it's the second edition, study Bible, but not the authorized neither. And let's see. And I was kind of, man, I mean, reading on like the different names what a lot of people think, and I don't know, man. The marriage supper of the Lamb. You got, what is it? Let's see. There's the marriage supper of the Lamb, and then you have, let's see. There's the events that follow. Oh, the bride of Christ, the church. Okay, so that's what I was looking for too. But anyways, man, all these different terms, you know what I'm saying? Like, that even Jesus speaks about, right? You got the 10 virgins, 5 had enough oil and 5 didn't, right? They was waiting on the wedding, right? The groom to come. You got, I think it's Matthew chapter 22, I believe. The parable of the wedding supper, I believe, has a lot of significance. What I'm trying to explain tonight, And let's see here. And like I said, I'm not going to do but a little, probably, 20, 30 minute show on here. I'm going to go live on TikTok at 2 o'clock. So maybe about 10 more minutes on here. And I just kind of want to lay down my theory right quick, and if anybody, want to check it out, they could. All right, so here we go. Let's see. I was trying to look. I thought there was something else that I was going to get from right here, but I don't see it. I'll just see. So, a lot of times, they think these judgments come from God, right? They say, the first one, this is the people that believe the pre-trib rapture. And I still believe that people are going to be saved from a time of tribulation, but I think it's going to be a time of great tribulation. You know what I'm saying? The last 3.5 years. And what I'm trying to tell you tonight is that I probably should have said this when I had a lot more people on there watching, but dude, I think when they signed the treaty with Israel this last, couple months, if I'm right about all this, I believe that we have 3 years or so, however many years, it's 3.5 years. And then I believe that at some point there's going to be a rapture. You know what I mean? I could be wrong. I'm not trying to say that, hey, you had some rapture. I'm just trying to say by prophecies, right? And I'm going to prove tonight what I'm talking about. And let's see here. Okay, should I start in the church? Well, anyway, let me finish what I'm saying here. It says, and this is what most people think, especially your Protestants, right? Let me kind of explain what the Catholics think, and what the post-tribulation people think. But the pre-tribulation people, they think, first there's going to be a rapture right before, even the 7 years begins, and it'll be around the time that Israel, makes a, peace with the world, right? Especially with the Antichrist, he would make a deal with them for 7 years, right? And so the people for the pre-trib, they think, first you have, the rapture, happens. And then the judgment seat of Christ. Then second, they think that, the Gentiles and the living Jews will be judged. And this is at the second coming. And so that only believers will enter the millennium. Resurrected Old Testament saints and tribulation martyrs with positions in the millennium will be judged. And I believe this also will happen, here at the end of time too, at the end of the, the great tribulation. But I think that the judgment seat of Christ and the rapture of believers will be mid-trib. And I'm about to get to reading why. Then you have the third phase at the end of the millennium. All unbelievers will face the great white throne judgment, right? And everybody's name that ain't written in the book of life. Worshippers of the beast do not have their names in the book of life. Those who will be tossed in the lake of fire will not have their name in the book of life, And all believers' names are written in the book of life. If you're a true believer of Christ, man, and you will, like I said, if I'm right about the rapture, we'll all go in the rapture, about mid-trib. And like I said, the judgment seat of Christ is going to happen. And I think at the end of the tribulation, you got the second coming of Christ. The Gentiles, living Jews will be judged so that only believers can enter the millennium. All right, so, and then the resurrected Old Testament saints and tribulation martyrs with positions in the millennium will be judged. Okay. So, and then at the end of that, at the end of the millennium, all unbelievers will face the great white throne judgment. Okay, so that is what we're laying down our groundwork, what we kind of think here. And I'm going to, let's see here. Should I go ahead and just go? Okay. So, right. I really don't know where to start because this is information I've gathered over, like I said, over a year or so, man. And a lot of people think I'm a big, idiot on here just talking sometimes just because I'm country and, I like to wear a ball cap and possibly because it's 1:55 in the morning where I live, but also I'm just trying to say, dude, I have 3 kids. We run a family business. We've been taking care of grandparents, and man, just trying to do what the Lord wants me to do, man. I'm exhausted, I'm lucky I got the chance to get on here tonight, but I just want to encourage people, man, that if I'm right about this, and I'm just trying to say if they did make, that's one of the main signs is that, there'd be peace made with Israel and, the rest of the world. You know what I mean? The Antichrist, would make peace, world peace, right? And that would be a dead sign. And there was kind of so, and, man, and I'm just trying to say, and if I'm right about that, and dude, the crazy thing is, what people don't understand is all the demonic activity that's happening right now. I mean, look, the freaking Super Bowl's tomorrow, man. And you imagine what kind of thing they're going to pull for that tomorrow. I mean, dude, every Super Bowl conspiracy, I got into that about a couple years ago myself. And I'm telling you, man, you can't tell me there wasn't some weird things happening at the Super Bowl. And I found out tonight, it's Jay-Z and Beyonce that picks the people for the Super Bowl. I never knew that. And I don't, really know much about them, but we know Nicki Minaj is putting them on blast right now with some crazy stuff. I mean, goodness, man, these ain't just harmless accusations and, this and that. I'm telling you, we ain't in the end of times. I'm telling you, man, it's going to walk up and slap some of these pre-trib rapture people right in the face, to realize that, hey, we already living in it, man. They done made technically world peace. You know what I'm saying? And I'm just trying to say, a lot of people try to point the finger at Donald Trump. And don't get me wrong, man, I disagree with a lot of things he does too, but I'm just trying to say, he couldn't be him, you know what I'm saying? I mean, he's just a puppet, you know what I mean, to some extent. And I hate to even say it like that because, sometimes, I grew up watching television, so I knew who he was years ago, you know what I'm saying? But I'm telling you, you can't tell me ain't some words. If anything, one of the best possible Antichrist I've seen yet that I could imagine would be Jeffrey Epstein himself. You know what I mean? Or, and I got a couple other ones too, I'd say, just for some crazy, thing to lay down tonight. It's just that. Because the beast is supposed to be wounded, right? And then he's fatally wounded and he's supposed to make like a comeback somehow. You know what I mean? In the end times. I'm just trying to say, I mean, the dude supposedly hung himself in a cell, and now all of a sudden he's, getting photoed in, all these different places, And then they had that place locked down in Mexico or whatever he owned. I mean, you can't tell me that ain't weird, right? I mean, dude, and the only reason why I say that just because, he's supposed to make peace with him, but I don't think he's supposed to be a Jewish person. He'd be like a, some foreign leader of some kind, you know what I mean? That he would be young at this point in time. The Antichrist would be. He wouldn't be old, you know what I mean? He couldn't be Trump because he's too old to play the part anyways, you know what I mean? I think that really if you get about, later than probably, I think, the Antichrist was probably born in the 90s or 80s. You know what I mean? Something like that. You know what I mean? And right now, if I'm right about everything, right? And that's what I'm trying to tell you, dude. People don't realize what we're about to face. And see, I think that's one of the kind of false things that's been preached, and that's the crazy thing about all of it too, is this pre-tribulation rapture. Like nobody's going to be here to see none of this. Like we shouldn't worry about it. But I'm just trying to tell you, how about I'm telling you, did not study the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation close enough. Because I can prove to you tonight, Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, and Revelation, where it talks about the woman going into the wilderness for 1,260 days, you know what I mean? And, taking off his eagle, and he's protected from, the devil himself, I'm just trying to say, bro, there's no way that you cannot see it the same. Read Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. It said that he would be, that these, saints and stuff would be handed over, they'd be tried and all this stuff would happen, and here, I might as well just read it while I got it. And like I said, this ain't gonna be a long video. I'm just trying to, I'm about to go live on TikTok here in a minute. I imagine it's gonna get crazy on there. But, see, that's what I'm saying, dude. Everybody, and I'm just trying to say, you imagine if the Catholics and, all the post-tribulation people were right too. They think that we're in the last hour, man. What the Catholics, that's what they preach, that they think we're in the last hour. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I think that if I'm right, when the world peace got made this past, couple months, And I'm just trying to say, I know it didn't last for, a couple days or whatever, but we all know that they, at the UN, they made world peace for a few days or weeks or something like that before they started bombing each other again in the Middle East. I'm just trying to say that's supposed to be one of the main signs of the Antichrist. You know what I mean? And then at the end of the first 3.5 years, the abomination, desolation will, happen. Where the Antichrist will present himself as God in the temple. You know what I mean? And dude, did y'all not hear about them secretly sacrificing the red heifer over there? There's a dude that's kind of like a whistleblower right now that's on the internet. Got the whole video online where they done it. It's crazy, man. But anyway, it says that and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and to change times and laws. And see, that was another thing that we were supposed to know was a sign. You know what I mean? That, things that we consider wasn't right back in the day would be considered cool now, or it'd be like, it's not that bad, you know what I mean? Shall be given into his hand, and this is the Antichrist, right? Until a time and times and dividing of a time, right? Then you go to the book of Revelation. And I'm telling you, man, people need to realize what we're about to go through some stuff, man. And I'm telling you, we already have, and people's not noticing it, man, because everybody's so busy on their cell phones or social medias, focused on their self. See, that's another reason why Peter said that, I think, because people will be so distracted in the end times, they wouldn't see it coming. Even Jesus said that, he was like, man, it'd be like in the days of Noah. They won't know it until it's slapping them in the face, and the water's washing them away, considered the days of Noah, right? But, let's see here. And this is after a year or so I've been studying this, man, so it's been crazy. But like I said, if I'm right, there's 3 years or so that we have, until I think that it could possibly, if there's ever any possibility, because there's the first time there's ever been world peace in the East. Like I said, it wouldn't book for a little bit. Remember, they started bombing each other again, but there was. And I'm almost done here. I'm almost to my point. Okay, so let's see here. It's not 14. Where did I say that was? Oh, 12. What am I talking about? Okay, so and it says in Revelation chapter 12, verse 14, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the servant. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. I think if there was ever a rapture going to be happening, these people are going to be called up and all this, because apparently it's a debate that's going on throughout history, forever. And honestly, if you haven't ever studied scriptures, I can understand why you could be doubtful of that, because, at this point, you almost doubt everybody saying anything, because people preached misinterpretations of the Bible forever now. You know what I'm saying? And I know it's hard not to believe, but I'm trying to tell you right now, I've been studying this for over a year solid, and I mostly just take care of my kids, and we run a family business, and I got a lot going on, but I've put a lot of time in this, and I'm trying to tell you, I don't know how I even stumbled upon this. My wife helped me come up with a lot of this, you know what I mean? Or, I didn't come up with it, but we just kept, like, hey, this sounds like that, studying this, studying that, and I've been studying the rapture since last year. But I'm just trying to say, dude, if you ask me, if you read that prophecy in Daniel, that, they're going to go through this time of 3.5 years, and this says right here that they would be, given wings, right? And they would fly into the place in the wilderness where, the place where God prepared for her. And it says, where she will be nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of, to be protected from the serpent. You know what I mean? Okay, so let's see here. Let me go to my point where they'd have to be, God gonna save, the people from a time of tribulation. Okay, so first I have to go over this, right? And this is formally known as the church age theory. You know what I mean? The book of Revelation of the churches in chapter 2 to 3. Okay. And I've studied this and see, even before I stumbled upon this, I was already thinking this myself. So, see the church age theory here is right. So there were 7 church eras, is what I believe. The first one, was the apostolic church, who, left its first love, about, right after Jesus died to, about 100, And then you got, and which is Ephesus, right? And you got Samara. And the persecuted church, that was about from 100 to 312, the era of the, intense Roman persecution. And I'm telling you, dude. Hey, what's going on out there, man? But the Romans, I mean, oh my God, dude, after I studied a lot of, what happened to the church and, during the time of Nero, just for example, if anybody was the Antichrist back in the day, it was Nero, you know what I mean? I mean, dude, this guy, because see, he even went around making people, what do they call it? Like, denounce Christ, and like say that he was God. If they didn't, he would kill them. That played out, man. And then, this dude would tie Christians to like, this is one of the Caesars in Rome, right? This was, Nero, not a very well liked one. I mean, he starved and killed his own people. You know what I'm saying, man? He was a terrible person, dude. And that's why I've been looking a lot into like, the history of Rome and what's going on there. I think possibly the Antichrist could come out of Rome somehow. You know what I mean? It could be anywhere over in the, that kind of region. It's supposed to be somebody like that, I imagine, and I ain't gonna go all that tonight about Nero, but man, they predicted, they thought for years after that he was gonna come back, somehow, all the prophecies about the Antichrist, supposed to be fatally wounded and come back, but I don't think that was the case. But I think he was an example. Hey, appreciate it, man. My wife got it for me for my birthday one year, and I've wore it ever since, and I love it. But then you got the third church, right? Pergamum. This was the state church, okay? And this happened for about, like I said, 312 to about 590. And it was it's the compromise church. If you read these churches in the first, 2 chapters of the book of Revelation, or, 3 chapters, excuse me. It's actually in chapter 2 and 3. And this is the compromise church is what I believe. Starting with Constantine, you know what I mean? It's when they started changing a lot of stuff, man. You know what I mean? Goodness gracious, we ain't gonna get nothing done. But you got Thyatira. This was the Middle Ages, right? About 590 to about 1517 almost, characterized by false doctrine and the rise of papacy, which would be like the Pope, and all this. And see, if I'm right, even Jesus in the book of Revelation, the first, 3 chapters called it everything, man. If that ain't proof, and I'm telling you, if you go back and you study them, you can see how that would relate, this church age theory, to why these scholars come up with it. You know what I mean? And they didn't come up with it. It's almost like obvious. Because, see, I thought about this even before I studied it. And I was just like, I was curious. I was like, hey, I wonder if there's any kind of theories like that. And I looked it up, and boom. So many people out there thinking the same thing I was. All right, so then you got the 5th one, right? Would be the church Sardis, right? The Reformation church. So this would be like the Protestant, uprising, right? And if you read it, I'm telling you, dude, it'll blow your mind. I mean, I come up with this, and I didn't even know about this theory at this point in time. And there's a lot of people, but it ain't the most popular theory. A lot of people either post-trib or they're pre-trib. There's very small, and I'm telling you. But it's all because, I don't know, man. I don't know why anybody would want it to be at the end of time. I guess it's just if you was just accepting it. You know what I mean? That it is what it is. And then you got these people thinking, hey, I ain't going to be here for this. You know what I mean? I ain't got to worry about it. And hey, I'm going up there. But, more likely when as soon as they get in front of Christ, He's going to tell them they don't know Him. But, they probably going to be thrown in hell. You know what I mean? Just because, most people are hypocrites, man. Especially people that think like that, man, if you ask me. Because, if anything, we should be worried about right now more than ever. There's a battle going on over souls that, if you ask me, the enemies, kicking our butt because we ain't out here doing our job, man. You know what I mean? Preaching the gospel to people, man. You know what I mean? And, doing it in like kind and doing it a way like Jesus taught us to do it, man. But, and right now, there's been a fall away from the Protestant church. Over 10%, dude. People going to other non-denomination or going Catholic or, starting their own thing or something, you know what I mean? Or turning people atheists. I'm telling you, man, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, man. It used to be about, the Bible was the core doctrine, and now they, just like all of them, man, it seems like sometimes they let they got these church rules they start making up, and then it's not about the Bible anymore. It's about, excuse me, it's about, the church rules, you know what I mean? So we're to where I'm sorry, it took me a minute to get to, but the Church of Philadelphia. This, I believe, is a church that gets raptured. Like I said, and this could be anywhere from 1700s to the 1900s. And I just believe, man, I was born in 1990, and I'm just trying to say, how about if we're the last generation? I mean, dude, you wouldn't believe, I could go in, other things I thought's happened, but it's just, dude, I don't know, man. So, because this was a church of, evangelism and missionary expansion, you know what I mean? The gospel would be preached around the world, bro. You tell me that almost everybody ain't heard the gospel in the world, and I'd have to, almost laugh at you because, I mean, if anything about, it's been preached to everybody for a while now, you know what I mean? I don't care what nobody says, you know what I mean? Maybe not these people, they don't know anything about it, but I'm talking about like all around the world. Man, you gonna tell me that the gospel ain't been preached around the world by now? I don't know if I can believe that, And then you got, the next church, Laodicea, right? Was the lukewarm church that's gonna be left behind. Okay, so like I said. So, in the church age theory, the 7 churches of Revelation, this is Revelation 2-3, represent the consecutive historical eras, right? Represent consecutive historical eras. With Philadelphia, Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 13, symbolizing as the faithful missionary. And you know what I thought was crazy too? There's only 2 of the churches of the 7 that are not condemned by Jesus. You remember, that? I never even thought about that until I started studying this. And I thought that was crazy. But it says, with Philadelphia, Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 13, symbolizing the faithful missionary church spared from the coming of the great tribulation. Philadelphia is identified as the raptured church, and it is the last fulfilled church before the lukewarm post-trib age. Okay? And that's what I was saying a while ago. Philadelphia and Smyrna are the only 2 churches that did not receive condemnation from Jesus when he was, talking to the churches, sending the angels to the church, right? Or, Anyways, Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, he said, I will keep you from this hour of trial. But like I said, just because we know there's going to be rapture, but what time does it mean? That just says that this one church, but I'm just trying to say, if I'm right about the church age theory, that this, would totally make sense, right? It'd have to be, and then the prophecy, Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, Revelation chapter Revelation chapter 12, verse 14 would make totally sense. That would come in the mid. You know what I mean? That'd be 1,260 days. And then the rapture happened to be 1,260 days. And then the second coming. So, this is what I'm thinking here. Mid-trib rapture. First 3.5 years. Beginning, this is the beginning of sorrows. Even Jesus talked about this. You know what I mean? And, possibly the seals 1 through 6 and trumpets 1 through 6. And I think, about the 7th trumpet is the one for the rapture anyways. And so there's going to be a second 3.5 years. That's going to be the bowl judgments. But anyway, the church age ends and the rapture occurs around the 7th trumpet, what a lot of these people think. And I don't know, I just know it's definitely around the trumpet because that even talks about that. And is it 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse like 12, 14, somewhere? All right. And that last 3.5 years is considered the Great Tribulation. Okay, so what does this mean for us, right? The Antichrist is revealed earlier. But the intense wrath of God is still avoided. We will still be saved from the time, but I'm telling you, dude. And see, a lot of these people think the rapture, at midpoint, of Daniel's 70th week. But see, when I was studying that too, that I believe that a lot of that is like a countdown to where, Jesus came, and then it was finished on the cross. They said when he was, even up to the week, but, we ain't getting that night. But I'm just specifically talking about Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. And Revelation chapter 12, verse 14. You know what I mean? Considering what I'm talking about here, that would make sense, because, a lot to it, because Daniel's, 70th week, I think, let's see here. I was looking at it the other day. I might as well go ahead and, while we're here, let's see. It said even down to the wire, it was, and I'll tell you what, man, if you haven't heard it, listen to Maury Emanuel's interpretation of the book of Revelation on the beast and stuff. I'm telling you, man. Okay, so Daniel 70th week, it says that's when the messianic work, would be completed, and it said, let's see. So it said, Sir Robert Anderson calculated the end of the 69th week to fall on Palm Sunday, just before the Lord's crucifixion. So that goes to something totally different. You know what I mean? But some people think that, dude. That's not what I'm trying to say here. So I'm trying to say, the first 3.5 years is what they call the beginning of sorrows. So the Antichrist will rise to power. And like I said, he would be young at this point in time. The treaty is made with, with Israel and around the world, there's world peace for a few, for a moment. That's when it happens, right? So, what does this mean, right? Likely, the Antichrist is going to establish a covenant with Israel, right? But see, when the covenant got broke this last time when they did make that peace over for them, a week or two or something like that. And I was blowing my mind then, like nobody was even talking about it, dude. And, all of a sudden, remember, they started bombing each other over again, but there still was considered. And he said that he wouldn't break his treaty with Israel, not with, the other people, you know what I mean? And look, who stood strong, right? I mean, I'm just trying to say, I ain't talking bad about nobody, but I'm just trying to say, also, if you read, that Revelation chapter 3, talking about the church of Philadelphia, remember also reading them contents, of that church of Philadelphia, it talks about these fake Jews and all these people, right? They wasn't really Jews, they was, false. And, I got a lot of different ideas about that too, and a lot of people put that to a lot of different things. But I'm just trying to say, I don't know if that's talking about people like Epstein, you know what I mean? People like that, you know what I mean? That's, you know, he's supposed to be like, what, an Israeli spy or something. But how if, you know, he was, you know, who knows, right? But I'm just trying to say, definitely some weird stuff happening. If I'm right about this, there's, you know, not even, I don't even know what to say, 3.5 years. If I am right to the rapture come. And I'm just trying to say, it's going to have to be close to the day and hour nobody knows, you know, when the Jewish holiday comes by. I don't know why I keep thinking that, man, but there's some connection to that. And that's why all these people keep thinking that the rapture is going to happen around that time, too, is because that is a day and hour when nobody knows. You know, they can tell by the stars or something like that, you know what I mean? Or I don't know how some type of astrology, you know. But I don't know about that, but, you know, I know for sure, though, you know, don't ever let nobody tell you that they know the rapture's coming on a certain day or a certain time, because we do not know that. You know what I mean? That's exactly what Jesus said. But I do think that's a crazy connection why people keep thinking that. You know, and if you go back through time, a lot of people thought it was going to be around them days, because probably around because of that reason, right? Okay, so we know that believers on earth will experience persecution from the Antichrist. But this period is characterized by more human-driven conflict, right? Seals 1 through 6. Rather than direct divine wrath like the bowl judgments, you know? So I think after this first half, the beginning of sorrows, you have the midpoint would be the rapture, and I think that, you know, it's going to be the judgment seat of Christ. And then you're going to have the second half of the bowl judgments and all this. You know, the 7-year period is over, you know, at the end of it, you know, which would be, this is the second half that we're talking about, would be often associated with the, you know, so they think at the, you know, at the end of the first half when people rapture, you know, that's when he's going to break the covenant with Israel, right? And then that's when the abomination desolation happens and starts the Great Tribulation. So the second half, the Great Tribulation, the church is in heaven, right? Or the believers, you know what I mean? The followers of Jesus Christ. Then, while those remaining on earth will face the 7 bowl judgments of God's direct wrath. And end of the year 7, the second coming, Christ returns visibly to the church to defeat the Antichrist, judge the nations, and begin the 1,000 years. Okay, so, and we're going to talk more about what's going to happen throughout these, you know, judgments here on out. But I really wasn't even going to get on here this long, but I wanted to finish my statement here. And I'm going to try to go on TikTok for a little bit tonight, too. Got to do a little bit on there and kind of hit on with this too, because this is my first time really going over this. But that's why I think that. Like I said, Daniel chapter 25, or excuse me, Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, Revelation chapter 12, verse 14. You know, and y'all can look at it, you know, and I think also the same events referred to in Revelation chapter 14, verses 14, 16. And I'm going to go over all the reasons why next time when I get more into it. And I have, you know, but it's already took me 30 or 43 minutes to even explain this little part here. Then, you know, Matthew 24, I think I've come up with some good points about this, you know, when Jesus was talking to his disciples. Lots of good notes on Matthew 24. And, you know, of course, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. So, like I said, I've been studying the rapture for over almost a year itself. Well, maybe not close to a year, but I've been studying the book of Revelation for longer than that. I almost got the whole book of Revelation wrote down by hand. You know, the contemporary edition. You know, the real easy, you know, English. And, but, like I said, I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. That's all I really have tonight. And I hope y'all can join me next time. And I'm going to try to get on here earlier. But like I tried to say it, man, I got 3 kids, running a family business. You know, had 2 or 3 grandmothers went down on my wife's side. So we're having to take care of the old people too, man, you know. And And I feel like that's something that a lot of us didn't catch from what Jesus was trying to say back then. That's why even John the Baptist even mentioned it. People weren't even taking care of the elders back then. It was just like that's what Jesus said, that they just pay the temple priests whatever, and they just look over it. It was okay to disobey or not honor your father and mother, and that's in the Ten Commandments. You know what I mean? Goodness gracious, man. That goes all the way to the beginning. Well, God said, not, He said, honor your father and your mother, you know what I mean? But God bless y'all. I appreciate everybody coming out. We're going to end it right here. And I got more to come, but something to think about, man. You know what I mean? I could be right. A lot of, if prophecy, it just don't make no, sense. Why? I think, honestly, a lot of people, reason why they go the pre-trib so quickly, it's just because you're safe from everything. And then it kind of blows your mind, that's why I think a lot of people look at Catholics when they're crazy, because they think they're going to have to go through it all. But they also think that they're in the last hour. You got to think about that too. You got to give them some credit for that they think, they're waiting any minute for the world, everything to be going. You know what I mean? So, and that's what I'm trying to say to you. If I'm right about all this, the world peace was made a couple months ago. And I'm just trying to say 3 years. Who knows, man? But I'm telling you, there's already a lot of crazy signs. I could tell you about some things that's happened here recently. I'm telling you, that's demonic rituals going on in the news and stuff. But we ain't going to get to that tonight, man. I got to get out of here, and I got a couple more things I'm doing. So, God bless everybody. I'll see y'all next time. God bless you. Like I said, man, y'all just, we got to pray for these people. You know what I mean? That's what to start with, because, you don't want to go through the Great Tribulation. You know what I'm saying? I mean, dude, it's going to be terrible. I mean, people are going to be awfully killed, and, it's going to be suffering for anybody that don't go. You know what I mean? So, it's definitely something to think about, Like I said, I'll see y'all next time. I'm out of here.